Hello everybody. How are we doing? So this tier list video is going to be based on the viability of Pokemon in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald in an in-game playthrough. So the Hoenn region. There are obviously going to be some Kanto and Johto Pokemon in here, and those will be included on the list as well, because you can use them in the games. Each Pokemon's viability in these games, I'm going to base them off of their availability, so when you can catch them in the game, how many battles you can use them for, etc. Their stats and their move pool, which are obviously super important to battling it overall, and then how they compare to their contemporaries, so like Pokemon of their same type or of their same sort of use, I guess, like physical attacker or physical wall or whatever. Tidbit about the Hoenn region. It's one of my favorite regions. I play it all the time, and there's a lot of water towards the end of the game, so that will definitely factor in. But with that out of the way, let's get it started. So Sceptile is going to go up into Great. Um, I'm putting Sceptile in Great and not Busted, pretty much just because of its move pool and its type. It gets like Leaf Blade and Giga Drain and Dragon Claw. Like it gets some good moves, but it doesn't get a huge wide pool like some of the other Pokemon do. And then grass types in general are just kind of not great. They have a lot of weaknesses. They have a lot of resistance, so they're just in kind of as a rule of thumb not great. Sceptile probably is the best grass type though, and you get it super early, so there are a lot of points in its favor. It's super fast. It has great special attack. Like I said, good moves. It's useful against Wallace, um, Juan if you're playing Emerald, Roxanne, and a lot of the team Aqua fights. So for Team Aqua and Magma, I'm gonna kind of just base it off of Emerald, because if you're playing these games, you're probably playing Emerald. I'm not gonna say everybody's going to, but Emerald's probably the way to go. But yeah, Sceptile does well in a good amount of fights, has really good stats, and is probably the best of its typing. So it's gonna be great. It's probably the worst of the three starters, but that doesn't mean it's bad by any means. All right, Blaziken is also going to go in great. So the only reason that Blaziken is not in busted is because it isn't super fast, which you kind of expect it to be a little bit faster. It would be greatly benefited from being a little bit faster, and because again, a lot of the fights at the end of the game, especially in Emerald with the champion fight, are gonna be water types, which it struggles with. But other than those two things, it's really good. Its stats are super good. It has good physical and special attack. So it being a firefighting type isn't really like a problem, even though there's no physical special split yet. So that didn't come until Gen 4. It has a good. It can get like rock type moves, earthquake, stuff like that. So it has a pretty good move pool. Sky uppercut, blaze kick are strong. It has good options for the early game as well. It's good against Roxanne. It's good against Norman. It's good against Tate and Liza. In more so in Ruby and Sapphire, because they're both rock types. Um, it's good against Steven in the final fight for sure. It's good against Sydney. Good against some of Glacier's Pokemon. It's got a lot of good uses. And it can hold its own in the magma fights, not as much with the aqua fights, but it's a fire type. Like it'll probably win just because you can like sky uppercut, as long as you're not fighting the camera ups. But yeah, Blaziken definitely great. Not the best starter though. That is going to go to Swampert, who is in the busted tier. So Swampert has only one weakness, which is grass, and there are barely any grass type trainers in the entire game, and even when you come to them, you can just throw out like a tail or a yeah a Swellow or a Pelipper or a Ninjask or like any flying type, any fire type that you might have, a poison type like a Crobat or something like that. Like anyway, there are a lot of things you can do against the limited amount of grass types that you have to face in the game, and then for every other Pokemon that you face, Swampert can come in and do the job really well. It's bulky. It has great physical attack, decent enough special attack to make it work. Again, super good typing, great moves. It gets Earthquake by level up. It gets you can teach it Surf. You can teach it an Ice type move for good coverage. It does really well against all of the Magma fights. It does well against Roxanne. It does well against Flannery, Watson. As long as it's a Marsh Stomp, which I would think it would be by then. Not as well against Winona, but definitely well against Tate and Liza, and then really good against Steven. Like this thing pretty much can't go wrong. It is so good in pretty much every fight. Like even against Winona, like it's more of a neutral matchup because it's not really weak to anything that she has. It's more so just you can't hit it with an earthquake. You have to use other moves, but even still, it is pretty much neutral at worst and dominant at best in every single matchup. So Swampert might be the best Pokemon in the entire game. Um, it is that good. Okay, moving on to Mightyena. I'm gonna put it in meh. So it has a really good ability in Intimidate. That definitely helps. Um, its moves are like okay, so it's hurt by there being no physical special split because it is primarily a physical attacker, but it's a dark type, so its best stab is like Crunch, which is a special move. You can teach it things like Strength and Shadow Ball to give it some decent physical attack, and it's definitely good in the early game, definitely better in the early game than it is in the late game. It has a few late game uses, like against Phoebe, it could be useful, but there are definitely better dark types. It really isn't an awful just because of how early you get it. And for should I put it in decent? You get it early and it gets Intimidate. No, I think there's too many other good dark types in this game to justify that. So I'll leave it in meh. But yeah, it's not the worst thing in the world early game. It just doesn't really hold up later on, especially being TM dependent. Yeah. Lanoon is gonna also go into the mech category just because if this was an HM slave tier list, it would be uh it would be it would be at the top. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. Yeah. So it is not an HM tier list. It's an actual fighting ability tier list, and the stats just don't really hold up. Belly Drum can be a fun way to, especially if you're using items, like you can just Belly Drum and heal. But even still, there are better normal types and better physical attackers that are going to be more consistent. Its ability pickup is super good, but again, it's like it's not even used in battle. The only really upside to it is its HM use and getting it really early. But other than that, it's really nothing special. It's not awful though, just because of how early you get it and it has some use. I'm also gonna put Butterfree into the meh tier, and then I'm gonna put Dustox into decent. So Butterfree is in meh. It has a really bad typing. Bug Flying is famously bad just because how many weaknesses and how little resistances it has. Um, like you get it super early and then it gets completely bodied by Roxanne. The only reason it's not an awful is because its stats and moves are like okay. It gets some like powder moves. You can get it Giga Drain and stuff. And then it can be super useful against Brawly. But other than those two things, it really struggles at right like after the Brawly. Like it gets decimated by Watson, decimated by Flannery. It doesn't really do anything against Norman. Decimated by Winona. Decimated by Tate and Liza. Decimated by Juan. Like it's crazy actually how bad it is. through most of the game, and its stats don't hold up either. Like its stats are really holding it back as well. So I'm almost tempted to put it in awful, but I can't in good conscience because of how early you get it, and it is useful for at least one fight. So Dustox is indecent. It has a better typing for sure. It doesn't get pushed around by everything. It has a better move pool. It gets like the powders as well. And then gets a few more like utility moves. It has a better stat spread for what it is. It's a little faster, and is a little bit more bulky. But again, like it's not useful later in the game really. You don't really want like a stat spreader that can't do damage at a certain point in the game. But it just gets decimated by less of the fights. Like it can be a lot better against Watson and Norman and Tate and Liza. Well, actually, no, it's kind of worse against Tate and Liza. Should I move it down to meh? No, I'm gonna leave it indecent. Just I think it has enough use and a good enough move pool not to put it in meh, but it's close. Actually, you know what? No, I'm gonna put it in meh. Just because, like, it's really not that much better. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's really not that much better than Beautifly. Um, it definitely has some use. It's better in like a Nuzlocke format where you're going to be a little bit less reliant on it to do damage. But in a playthrough where you kind of want most of your Pokemon to do a decent amount of damage and have good moves and stuff, like it's not great. I'm gonna put Ludicolo in decent. So Ludicolo doesn't get a great move pool. You get it. It's really its first good solid move that you can get it is Surf, and that comes relatively late in these games. Like you can get it Giga Drain around that same time, which is good. You can get it Ice Beam, but I think obviously there are better grass and water types. It is cool that it's a mix of the two, and it has good stats, and it is available super early and has use against Roxanne and Juan and Wallace and Steven and a lot of Team Aqua fights and even the Team Magma fights. It definitely has its place, and it has decent stats, but it kind of gets outclassed, and it doesn't have great moves. Shiftry is going to go into meh. It has okay stats, and it definitely has less use than Ludicolo, but its main problem is its move pool. Um, it's really bad. It gets I think it gets Giga Drain and then maybe Feint Attack, but I'm not even sure. But those moves are not gonna really cut it as your highest damaging moves. Especially when your best stat is physical attack, like you have to teach it Shadow Ball or Slash or something like that. It can maybe be a little bit useful early, but even then, it kind of just gets like nature power when it becomes a Nuzleaf, and is really bad when it's a C-Dot because C-Dot is really bad. It's not awful. It has too good of stats to be in the awful tier, but it's really not good. It's almost an awful. It's pretty close. But it's like a Beautifly. You know what? I'm actually going to put Beautifly into awful now that I'm thinking about it. I think Beautifly is a tier below the rest of these Pokemon that I'm looking at in the meh tier. Okay, Swellow, I'm gonna put into great. I think Swellow is super, super good. So the thing is with Swellow is that it gets guts. And what you can do is you can have it be poisoned, avoid using the Poke Center, and then just if you're able to heal, actually probably burn would be better because poison you take damage outside of battle, but Guts is super good because you can get it a status ailment and it can just boost its stats permanently for the rest of the game. And you can teach it Facade, which stacks onto that, which is also a stab move, and it can do a crazy amount of damage. But besides those things, you get it super early. It's useful in a lot of fights, like with Brawly and some of Winona's Pokemon. And yeah, it's just generally strong. It's really fast. It has good moves. You can teach it Steel Wing, Fly, Facade, like I said. can be really good. Yeah, I just think it has the right spread and mix of like stats, and moves and availability that it just pushes itself right into great. It's not as good as Blaziken or Sceptile just because it's not as strong, but it's definitely useful throughout the entire game. Pelipper is going to go into decent. It has good bulk. You can get it like stockpile. You can do some interesting things with that. You get it really early. It's useful for a lot of fights. Like it's useful against Brawly. It's useful against Roxanne. Steven in some cases, if you're careful. You can get it Surf. You can get it Fly. Like it can be very utilitarian in that way, but it really doesn't have the best stats. It's decently bulky. It has a decent special attack. It really doesn't have good physical attack, which holds it back being a flying type. But yeah, Pelipper's decent. It definitely has a use. Just not as good as a lot of the other Pokemon that are flying types or water types or what have you. Definitely outclassed, but good, still good. Gardevoir. Hmm. I think I think Gardevoir is going to go into busted. Okay, so Gardevoir is one of the best special tanks, I guess, in the game. Its special attack and defense are super high, and you can get Calm Mind, which if you Calm Mind set up with Gardevoir, it's GG. Like it's super ridiculously good. The only holdback I'm having to Gardevoir maybe like not being busted is the presence of Alakazam because Alakazam is like faster but more frail. But I think it holds its place in busted. So Gardevoir has really really good stats, really good special attack, really good physical attack, or excuse me, special defense. You can get it Calm Mind. You can get it Thunder Punch, I believe. You can get it Psychic. And if you Calm Mind Psychic, like, it literally just tears through the entire game besides maybe Phoebe and Sydney and, like, some Team Aqua fights, and that's kind of it. Like, it's so useful in so many fights and is available so early that I think it's definitely one of the best Pokemon in these games. I think it's worthy of being in busted just because it is super strong. It is a super strong Pokemon overall. All right. Masquerain, garbage, awful, terrible. So Surskit on its own, it's available early, but it's also such a pain in the ass to find. It's a 1% encounter. And it's probably the Pokemon who is least worthy of being a 1% encounter in the history of the franchise. Because its stats are literally so garbage. Its typing, like its partner in awful tier, is literally terrible. There's no reason to have a puck flying type in these games. I think everything about it besides its ability is just bad. And getting it to a Masquerain from a Surskit is so painful that like Intimidate is just not worth it. Like there are plenty of other Pokemon who have Intimidate that are far superior to Masquerain for sure. Okay. Yeah, Masquerain, holy cow. Breloom. I'm gonna put Breloom in great. Its attack is super high. It gets Sky Uppercut and Mach Punch and Leech Seed, so it gets good moves. Its typing is a little bit unfortunate and does hold it back at times, but I think this is a super good Pokemon. You can get it before the first gym. It's good against Roxanne, good against Brawly. Where else is it good? Definitely Juan and Wallace and Steven and Sydney. Good against all the magma fights or not the magma, the aqua fights for sure. Not as great against the magma fights. Not great for Tate and Liza. Not great for Winona. Good for Norman for sure. Not great against Flannery. So it struggles in some places, but is great in others. So yeah, I would say Breloom is in great, yeah, great stats, good enough moves to make it work, and yeah, it's definitely great. Slacking, yeah, slacking is busted. I really don't care that that it's in that it or not that it's in that it has Truant. I do think it definitely holds it back, but there's a reason it holds it back. It needs to hold it back. Slacking is literally an insane Pokemon. Like you can give Hyper Beam to it, and the thing is with Hyper Beam, is that if it doesn't, I think if it doesn't, no, I think if it does kill, it might even be true if it doesn't kill. Truant just goes away because you already have to recharge for Hyper Beam anyway, so they don't stack Truant on top of that in these games. Um, so yeah, slacking is a one hit KO machine. Like it can take out pretty much anything in the game that isn't on Phoebe's team. Um, because obviously there goes, and even then, if you teach it any sort of coverage move, like because it gets a lot of them, it has a very wide move pool and is available super early, by the way. It just, in case there needs to be any more selling points on this thing. It definitely has a good move pool. It has unbelievable stats. Like it has like 100 or more across the board at like and with like 165 base physical attack. Like this thing, the Truant ability does not hold this thing back enough. Honestly, like they should have made its stats a little bit worse because obviously competitive it's not great, but in game absolutely nuts what this thing can do. Alakazam is going to go into great. I think Alakazam is only not in busted because it's a little outclassed by Gardevoir because Gardevoir just has better bulk and kind of a better move pool too. Like it gets more like attacks, whereas Alakazam does get recover, but that's not really as useful in an in-game playthrough. Alakazam is basically just faster, frailer Gardevoir. Like it's super good. You can get it Calm Mind, Psychic rips through most of the game. There's not that much to say about Alakazam that I didn't already say for Gardevoir. It's just a little bit weaker, and you get it a little bit later, but it's still useful in pretty much all the same fights. Ninjask. I'm gonna put Ninjask into decent. So it's definitely the best bug flying type. It gets good stats. It has good stats. It gets good moves. You can protect Baton Pass with its speed boost ability. You can teach it Sword Stance. It gets by level up. So this thing, it definitely has a lot of utility, but it can stand out on its own. Like you can teach it Aerial Ace and other physical attacks where like you need to be careful with it, but it can hold its own, and then it has that added utility of having the speed boost baton pass potential. So definitely really really good in a vacuum, but it doesn't quite get the moves to make it be a great Pokemon, but it's definitely useful. Shedinja, I'm torn because Shedinja's usefulness is really dependent on how guided your playthrough is. Actually, no, I'm gonna put Shedinja in great. So Shedinja isn't as useful. Well, no, I shouldn't even say that. It's more powerful later on in the game, just because it gets like Shadow Ball later on, which is a good stab move. But so Shedinja is unique because it has an ability. So I guess I should have explained Slacking's ability more. Slacking has an ability where it can't move every other turn. Shedinja has an ability on the other end of the ability spectrum. It can only be hit by super effective moves, weather, and like burn or poison. That's the only way it can take damage. But the caveat of that is that it has 1 HP at all times. So Shedinja, um, if you are in an in-game playthrough where everything is like you can look up every single move of every single Pokemon that you're going to fight in these games theoretically. Um, but even then, there are enough situations where it gets killed outright that it's not quite in busted. So like if you were to use it against Roxanne, it would die. Against Flannery, it would die. Against Winona, it would die. Against Tate and Liza, it will die. So there are a lot of fights where it's not useful, but I should say there are a few fights where it's not useful, but every other fight, it's literally invincible. It's like as long as you know what you're doing, this thing is like so good, so broken for 75% of the game. It's not broken for the entire game, so I can't put it in busted. But Shedinja, it's a very interesting and unique Pokemon to use, and it kind of breaks Pokemon down in a way that no other Pokemon has. But it's really good. I can't hate. Xploud. That's tough. It's either in great or decent. Typing is good. Move pool is excellent. I'm gonna put it in great because its move pool is really good and you get it super early. It has good enough stats to back up whatever moves you decide to give it. So like normal stab and then 3 coverage moves or however you want to do that. It's useful in a lot of fights as normal types are because of their coverage. It has good stats, like it has good physical and special attack and good HP, so it can soak up some hits. Soundproof is a sneaky, useful ability in these games. It helps a lot more than you'd think it would. Yeah, Xploud. The only problem with Xploud really is that it's just not quite as strong as like a Slacking, and it evolves pretty late. It's a Whismer for a long time, and Whismer is not great. Even for a pre-evolution, but even still, Xploud is definitely really good. Very useful, and yeah, it's not quite busted, and it's outclassed a little bit, but it's great. Hariyama. So Hariyama is really, really good. It has good stats. Oh, no, it evolves pretty early. I'm gonna put it in great too. It's close to being in busted, but its stats and its typing are just not quite good enough to put it in busted, and its move pool as well, I should say. So it has really good physical attack. It has good HP. You get it right before the second gym. So unfortunately, if it was useful against Roxanne, that would help its case. But it's really most useful against trainers like Norman, Sydney, and Steven and the Aqua fights. But Hariyama is really strong. It gets good enough. Like it can get Brick Break. It can get Strength for physical coverage. It can get rock type moves for physical coverage, like Rock Slide by Tutor, and then Rock Tomb. Like it gets good moves. It has a good typing. It just kind of struggles with like Tate and Liza and Winona and Phoebe. So it has a few too many fights where it's really not super useful to put it in busted, but it's really good. I like Hariyama a lot, and you get it pretty early on. Like it evolves at like level 22, I think. You get it way earlier than you'd expect it to. All right. Sea King is gonna go in meh. It's very outclassed. Like there are so many better water types in these games. It has bad special attack. It has decent physical attack, which doesn't really help it. Because it doesn't get that many good physical moves, even for coverage. You get it somewhat early, and it's not as awful as like a Beautifly or a Masquerain, but it's really not worth using in most situations. Yeah, there's just a lot of better water types out there. Gyarados. So like with Fire Red and Leaf Green, Gyarados is going to be in decent tier. In every game after Emerald or after Gen 3 that was released, Gyarados is going to be in either great or busted, just because the physical special split finally comes and allows it to have super strong stab moves, but for the time being, it just doesn't have the moves to match its stats. It doesn't get any stab flying moves. Um, it doesn't have good enough special attack to take use of the water moves that it gets, but it has Intimidate, it has great bulk, it has the great physical attacks, and you can teach it some physical moves. And it has good defensive typing. It's really only weak to Electric and Rock, which if you teach it Earthquake takes care of those problems. But I really like it when Pokemon have good stab move options, and some Pokemon don't, and Gyarados is one of them. Yeah, unfortunate for Gyarados, but yeah, it's decent for now. When it after Gen 3 into Gen 4 through 8, it's super super good. It's so good, and even in Gen 1, it's good because it has 100 base special, but just not in these games. It's not the game for Gyarados. Same thing kind of with Azumarill, which I'm going to put into Met. So Azumarill was complete garbage in Johto in Gold and Silver, but they gave it huge power, which doubles physical attack, which helps a lot. It doesn't have any stab physical moves because it's a water type, but you can teach it some physical moves. They will do a good amount of damage, and it's a water type, which is always good. Water types are good. Water types are good defensive types. But it really just is outclassed by things like Gyarados and Swampert and some of the other water types that we're going to get into later. And it doesn't have good stab options. And it doesn't, like, it hits basically the same as Gyarados, but Gyarados also has Intimidate and um, immunity to ground type moves and things like that. So it's basically just a worse Gyarados, which is weird because one is a serpent dragon thing and one is a bunny, but they fit similar roles, funnily enough. Okay, Golem. I don't know that I've ever used a Golem in these games. I'm gonna say that Golem is indecent. Golem obviously. So I'm assuming with trade evolutions, like with Alakazam and Golem and Machamp later on, that you can get them. If you can't, I would say that all these three Pokemon are probably going to be in the same tier anyway because their stats aren't really what's holding them back. Yeah, Golem has great stats. It hits like a truck. It gets Earthquake. It gets Rock type coverage. Like it gets Rock type moves that are good. It gets other coverage moves. It's just its typing and its ability are kind of unfortunate. Sturdy in these games does not work like it does in other games where you live with 1 HP. It really is just useful against one-hit KO moves like Sheer Cold. Its ability doesn't really do it much help, and then its typing allows it to just get bodied at the second half of the game. Like Juan and Wallace and the Aqua trainers and Wallace at the champion like and every trainer, like it's just going to be such a struggle to train a Golem up towards the end of these games. But in the beginning parts of these games, like against like Flannery, Watson, Norman, even like it's good. It's definitely a good Pokemon. Like it holds its own for the first half of the game. It just kind of falls off because of its typing in the second half of the game. Those water types really do it in. Nose Pass, there is no reason to use Nose Pass. Its physical attack is complete garbage. Its physical defense is good, but Golem is right there. Things like Aggron are right there. Rhydon is right there. Like, Nose Pass doesn't really have a use. Like, it hits so weakly and has, like, such meh moves and bad stats. Like, it really just isn't worth your time in any situation. Roxanne's seems to always have like be difficult, but that's because it's way early in the game and you have all pre-evolutions. Like, yeah, sure, it does do great against pre-evolutions, but when you're fighting Juan, what the hell is this thing gonna do? When you're fighting Steven or Wallace or any of the Aqua Grunts, like this thing is useless. It's useless beyond the Flannery fight, I would, or well, maybe it's useful for Winona, but even still, there are better options. And something is going to take care. Like Altaria can Earthquake it, Skarmory can Steel Wing it. Even the Tropius can do something to it, like Razor Leaf it, and it'll probably die. I really don't like Nose Pass in these games, and I don't really like Nose Pass in general. But yeah, sorry, Nose Pass fans. Awful. Speaking of awful, Delcatty, holy garbage. It has an ability that makes all of its moves normal type moves. Like, I get that it gives it a little boost of power, but normal type moves are not super effective against anything. Like, this thing theoretically, yes, it gets stab on all of its moves, but what moves are those going to be anyway? Like, I don't think it gets strength. What the hell does this thing get for moves? I don't even know. Like, I've used Delcatty so little just because of how garbage it is that I don't really know that much about it. So we're gonna learn together because I'm sure a lot of you haven't really used it that much either. So yeah, look at these stats. Awful stats. Shout out to Sarah B, great website. This is Gen 6. Okay, Gen 3. Yeah, so like, what's the point of teaching it Thunderbolt if it's just going to be a normal type move? Like, what is the point of any of this? The point of having all these moves is that they're coverage, but then, that's awkward. It has Q Charm. I'm gonna still put it in awful, just because I hate normalize, which it gets later on. So it has decent coverage. I can put my foot in my mouth for that one. It has decent coverage, but again, these stats suck so much that it's not worth it at all. There's so many better normal types that it having normalized doesn't even need to be part of the conversation, honestly. But I will say it's not as bad as I thought, despite it still being in the awful tier, because it doesn't have normalized. It has cute charm in these games, which isn't. It's not better. It's just not a detriment. When did it get normalized? There you go. Gen 4. It was one of its abilities. So it's not in Gen 3. But yeah, bad Pokemon. Okay. Crobat. I'm gonna say that Crobat is in decent. Yeah, I'm gonna put Crobat in decent. It hits a little bit weaker than Swellow because of the guts thing that you can do. Crobat's definitely super good. It's literally my favorite Pokemon, so don't think I'm like biased against it for any reason. Like, I love Crobat. Just not as much in these games. It gets decent moves. You can get it like Confuse Ray, Fly. I think maybe Sludge Bomb. You can get it fairly early if you do it right. You can grind out the happiness after it becomes a Golbat, and it'll become a Crobat quickly. It is super fast. It hits somewhat hard, but there are just better flying types, and poison types really aren't super useful in these games because there are barely any grass types, which is the only thing that poison is good against. And even still, like, you have the flying type, so like it being a poison type is somewhat good defensively, but like not really even that much in these games. But yeah, Crobat has good enough stats and is caught early enough on to where I can't put it in meh. Like, I could never do that to a Crobat, but it's not great. It's definitely outclassed, but it's good. It's not bad. Um, Tentacruel. I'm gonna put Tentacruel in great. I really like its special defense. Its special attack leaves something to be desired, as does its physical attack. But it's fast. It's specially bulky. It gets a good array of moves. You can get it early and often. It's useful in a lot of fights. It's useful against like Flannery, some of Winona's Pokemon, some of Tate. It can take hits from Tate and Liza's Pokemon, even though it's a poison type. And it can be useful against Steven. Like, it definitely has a lot of uses. It has good stats for sure. It hits well enough to where you can get over the fact that it doesn't hit quite as hard as some of the other Pokemon, and it soaks up special hits like a sponge. It's really good. I think it's super underrated. Sableye. I'm gonna put Sableye in meh. Just because I guess it has some utility in the fact that it has no weaknesses and that it's immune to normal and fighting type moves, and psychic type moves, which are a lot of moves in these games. So it's useful for like Tate and Liza and Brawly, but other than that, its stats are really bad. Its move pool definitely leaves something to be desired. It doesn't do anything for me. You get it pretty early, which is good, but I've never been a Sableye fan. And its stats are the main reason why. I just don't think it hits hard enough late enough in the game to where you're going to want to keep it around. And it doesn't really soak up hits either. Like, it just has good immunities. I'm going to put Mawile in the meh category as well. It doesn't get any stab moves. Its physical attack is not good enough to where you like wouldn't need stab moves like you could argue for Gyarados. It has a good typing. Obviously, Steel type is always good, but I really am not a fan of Mawile either. It doesn't do super well against a lot. Like, it gets bodied by Flannery, Brawly, all of the Magma, and really the Aqua fights. Steven does it in. Juan and Wallace kind of do well against it. Like, again, it doesn't get any stab moves, so it's not offensively a steel type. It's really just for defense. Offensively, it's a normal type, which is not good, and it doesn't get a wide array of moves. So it has good enough stats to keep it out of awful, but it's not good. Aggron is going to go into great. The only problem with Aggron is that it evolves super late. Again, like, you probably won't have an actual Aggron until like the end of the game, really. But its typing is good in every fight basically, except for Brawly, and and against camera ups. It has a lot of resistances. It hits like a truck. You can get an earthquake, rock slide, iron tail. Like, it does a lot of damage. It's very physically bulky. Like, it has a crazy physical defense stat. So if nothing else, it can be a physical wall. It gets a good amount of moves outside of its stabs. Yeah, this is definitely a good Pokemon. I would use this in a playthrough for sure. I'm gonna put Machamp. I'm gonna put Machamp into great. Oh, where'd it go? Oh, it went into busted. Whoopsie. I'm gonna put Machamp into great. It's basically the same thing as Hariyama with a little less bulk and a little bit more strength. Gets pretty much the same moves, has kind of the same gimmick. It's just a hard hitting fighting type. Is good in the same fights. Is bad in the same fights. Um, is outclassed by Blaziken probably, but all fighting types pretty much are in these games. Yeah, it's great. It's just not quite busted. Metacham is going to go into decent. If Metacham had physical psychic stab, then it would be in great, but it doesn't until the next generation. So its psychic typing is just kind of more defensive, and psychic really isn't a great defensive typing in these games. There are a lot of dark types and ghost types in these games, so it kind of just gets beat up on a lot. So yeah, I don't love Metacham, but it has huge power, or it has pure power, excuse me, and it gets good fighting stab enough to where you can do a lot of damage with it. But it's not like Breloom where it gets like great moves from its other type. It's kind of just like not. It's just not great. Like, it doesn't hit as hard as Breloom, and it's not as fast as Breloom. So it having the psychic typing but no psychic moves is not great. Especially in a lot of the fights where a psychic type would be, or a fighting type would be super useful. It just kind of isn't, because it's weak to dark types. Well, not weak, but it has a lot harder of a time with dark types. Okay, Manectric is gonna go into great. This is a classic Hoenn Pokemon. It's got a decent enough move pool. It can get Thunder Wave. It can get Thunderbolt. Um, that's really all it needs, honestly. It tears through the water types later on in the game. It tears through trainers like Winona. It tears through Wallace and Juan. It's really, really good for a lot of the game. It has great stats. It has great special attack. Thunderbolt is a great move, and that's really all it needs. It's an electric type. That's kind of how it is. All right, Minun. I'm gonna actually put Minun as decent. It's kind of just like a weaker version of Manectric, and it gets like similar moves. It just has. Actually, I'll group Plusle into this discussion as well. So, or I switch mine and Plusle all the time. One of the weirdest pairs of Pokemon to switch around, I know, but Plusle is indecent, Minun is in meh, because Plusle hits harder where it counts, and Minun is just kind of like, you would rather use a Plusle than a Minun, like pretty much every playthrough you would be using either one of them. Um, so yeah, I would say Plusle and decent, Minun and meh. Just a little bit better for Plusle. Magneton. Ooh, is Magneton busted? I think Magneton might be. No, Magneton's in great. Magneton has a lot of the same qualities as Manectric, but it's kind of just better because it has the steel typing. But that doesn't always mean it's better. It has some weaknesses that Manectric doesn't have, but it has a lot of resistances that Manectric doesn't have too. So it's kind of like pick your poison. But with that said, it's great against the late game. It hits like a truck. It is physically defensive. You know, it's really good. It's not quite busted, obviously, because it's quad weak to ground, it's weak to fighting, it's weak to fire. Like there are a lot of battles where it's not going to do as well, but I think it's pretty close to being unbusted. It's very very strong. If you could get Magnezone in this game, maybe if you could have it. If it got Levitate, which like it would be unbelievable if it got Levitate, like just in the general sense. But if it could give it Levitate, it would be super super good. But yeah, it'll be in great. Electrode is going to go into decent. It's basically just a faster Plusle. It has similar special attack, but hits a little bit weaker. And is faster. It's the fastest Pokemon in the game, so you can do with that what you will, but it doesn't really hit hard enough for that to matter. Like, Manectric and Magneton are always going to be better than it. So, yeah, I would say Electrode is decent, but it's not really... It's outclassed. Okay. These two sacks of poop. Awful. Terrible. Garbage Pokemon. I would never use them in a million years. Volbeat and Illumise. One of them gets Signal Beam, but they both have terrible garbage attack stats and bad defense stats, and like I really don't see what the use for them. Like Bug is a bad typing. I don't see where the use comes from of them. They're really just so awful, 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 awful. Like they don't get stabbed to make up for their bad stats. Like nothing can make up for their bad stats. Nothing. Nothing at all. All right. Moving on. I'm gonna put a Vileplume and Bellossom into the decent tier. They're kind of on the same page as Ludicolo, where they're good grass types, but grass types aren't good. They have good stats. Vileplume probably has somewhat better stats, but Bellossom has good enough stats to make them work. There's no reason to use them instead of Sceptile unless you didn't start with Sceptile. But even then, there's not really a great reason to use them. they're useful against like Quan in the late game and stuff just because they're grass types. But again, like they don't hit hard enough. They don't have good enough moves to where I'm like super excited about using them. But they have their use. Dodrio is going to be in great. It hits around where Swellow hits. You get it a little bit later. It's not quite as fast, but Dodrio is always going to be a solid Pokemon. Um, I would always use a Dodrio if I can. You get it pretty early. It hits well. You can teach it Steel Wing. It has good coverage. It has good moves. That gets Drill Peck and all those fun bells and whistles. It's a little bit worse in my opinion than Swallow, just because no facade cheese, but Dodrio is always going to be super good. Um, Roselia is basically just the same Pokemon as Vileplume. Honestly, they get similar moves. They have similar stats. They have the same type. Um, yeah, grass types again, not great, but it's decent enough. Like it has good special attack. It has good moves to back it up. It's just not all that useful. Um, there's not that many places where grass types are useful in these games. Swalot. I'm gonna put it in meh. It has a decent amount of bulk and like it can do some fun stuff with stockpile again, but like there's really no reason to use Swalot. Poison types are terrible offensively and kind of also defensively in these games. Not terrible defensively, but not really useful defensively. Um, where you get it like too like you can't use it against Brawly. I mean, I guess technically you can, but you really can't. You're not supposed to use it against Brawly. And if you are using it against Brawly, you're probably over leveled anyway, so it doesn't matter. That goes for all these Pokemon. Like, yes, you can actually use them against Brawly, but you're really not in a position where you're supposed to. But yeah, it has some decent use, but it doesn't have the stats or the moves or the typing to put it anywhere but meh. But it's not awful. Sharpedo. Sharpedo is one of my favorite Pokemon too. Because of no physical special split and how paper thin it is defensively, I'm gonna put it in decent. It's good in a lot of fights. You can't get it until after you get Surf. We're getting to that point in the game where we're not quite there yet. Like some of these Pokemon that you see, still can be like I think until Jiggly or Wigglytuff, you can get all of these before Surf. I don't know why Sharpedo. I guess because it's in that route, it just you can't get it without the good rod. Anyway, you can't get Sharpedo until after Surf, which holds it back because you can't use it against Flannery. Its best fight is definitely like Steven and Phoebe, but it only has it has a good special attack stat. It's just begging to be a physical attacker, and it can't really be with the stab it gets in these games. It would benefit a lot from the physical special split, and it does, as you would be able to see. Um, yeah, I would say Sharpedo decent. It's useful in some fights, but just not in enough fights. Okay, Wailord is kind of in the same boat. It has a decent physical and special attack. Not the physical matters. You don't get it until somewhat late, which stinks. It is a water type in the late game, which is it's good. It's good against the magma trainers. But it's kind of outclassed. You don't get it early enough for it to be super good. It's just not super useful in a ton of fights. It holds its own, but like it's kind of just like gonna hit for around half, maybe less than half, and then take like maybe half. Like it's just kind of like it's kind of the definition of right in the middle. Um, Camerupt is gonna go into decent as well. Camerup's typing holds it back a lot. It's really only super good against Flannery, ironically enough. And maybe some of the magma fights. But other than that, like it gets Earthquake, it has good moves and stats, so it won't be in math. But it's kind of like Golem, where the latter part of the game, especially against like Juan and Wallace and all the water type trainers, like it really just punishes it for being a water or a fire and ground type. Like it really, really gets bodied by a lot of Pokemon, especially on Team Aqua. Um, it really it's good in a vacuum, but it's just not great in these games. That's true about a lot of Pokemon, like Golem and Camerupt. But yeah, these are the games you're playing. So the water types at the back part of the game really kind of push it back a lot. Same thing with Macargo, but Macargo is also a rock type instead of a ground type. Macargo is garbage. Its best stats are its physical defense and its special attack. So its flamethrower can do a decent amount of damage, but against what? Glacia? There are better Pokemon to use against Glacia. Every single fire type that you can get in these games is better than Macargo. Pretty much every rock type except for Nosepass in these games that you get is better than Macargo. There's just no reason to use Macargo. It's horribly slow. It is always going to go second. Its rock type moves aren't really useful. Like it's just there's no reason to use Macargo over these other Pokemon. Like its stats just don't help it. Its typing is so bad, and yeah, I'm sorry, Macargo, but you stink. Torkoal. It's hard for me to put Torkoal. I can't put Torkoal in great. Where did I put it? Where did it go? It is not unobtainable. It's decent. It has some of the same pitfalls as Camerupt. It doesn't quite get bodied as much as Camerupt does by the water types later on in the game. However, it also doesn't hit as hard. It can take physical hits really well. Its ability, White Smoke, is really good. But it just doesn't. It doesn't really stand out. Like there are better fire types. There are better strategies for physical defense and special attack. And its typing holds it back for sure. But Torkoal is good. I'm tempted to put Torkoal in great, but I'm not going to. It's just not quite good enough for it. Same thing with Camerupt. They're just not quite useful enough. Muck and Wheezing are kind of in the same boat. They're poison so I'm gonna put them in decent as well. They're basically just better versions of Swalot. They hit a little bit harder. They have a little bit more utility, and they're available around the same point in the game. Like Swalot would only be useful in a like it wouldn't be useful, I should say, in a battle against Watson, and that's the only fight you can do with it that you can't do with these two. But yeah, they have good stats for sure. But they get beat out by Tate and Liza for sure. And they just really again poison types offensively in these games are just really not great. They both have decent enough physical attack to take advantage of like Sludge Bomb, but again, their typing doesn't help them offensively. Defensively, Weezing having Levitate helps it, but at the same time, they're like it's not as useful as you would think for that point in the game. And then Muck, it has good special defense, which helps against Tate and Liza, but again, it can't really dish it back out against Tate and Liza. So they're middle of the pack for sure, and they're available in the middle of the game. Grumpig is also going to go into. There've been a string of decent Pokemon. Grumpig is one of them just because it's really outclassed by Alakazam and Gardevoir. You get them earlier, they hit harder. Gardevoir can eat special hits better. Alakazam is faster, so like there's not really a great reason to use Grumpig, but I really like Grumpig, honestly. If this was a Nuzlocke tier list, I would have it higher just because it is really hard to get your hands on Gardevoir and Alakazam in those games where it's not with Grumpig, but it's not a Nuzlocke. So Grumpig, it's really just outclassed, but it's good. You can use it and it'll work. It just there's not really a great reason to use it.